name is Bobby Howsare, and yeah, I'm living and working in Kansas City right now. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and yeah, went to a community college at Philadelphia and transferred to KCAI, Kansas City Art Institute. And one of the big draws for me was HammerPress. So I'd never really heard of letterpress studio, outside of like Hatch. And yeah, so that was a big attraction for me to be able to, possibly get an internship. Maybe it would build and lead to something more.
Definitely.
And yeah, so throughout undergrad, I interned at HammerPress, started picking up more and more hours. And then I left for grad school in 2009 and at Ohio University, worked with Art Berger, Carla Hack-Miller, and yeah, moved back to Kansas City, where I'm currently working at HammerPress again full time, and then teaching classes at KC and KCAI.
Well, that's awesome. Ohio University. I mean, I'm familiar with Art Werger and some of those folks, and it's a great place. I mean, what was your experience like being there and working with like people like Art Werger, and like also like the experience at HammerPress?
Well, I mean, it's amazing. Like, I don't know, just like to work with someone and then you like see their prints, like in books and things. You're like, I worked with that guy.
Yeah.
And it's also like very humbling because his other prints are so beautiful, they're incredible. And for me, acting is really small, kind of rural, like Appalachia. Kind of reminded me, because that's where I grew up in Pennsylvania, like central PA. And so just trying to get back in, that kind of area. And it was nice because it was, there weren't too many distractions, so really kind of focus on your work. And there's a pretty, there's a lot of room for, I see over here, kind of interdisciplinary kind of research and stuff. So that was really nice. And then HammerPress, just like commercial printing has really informed my studio practice. Like, just being able to just like the system of printing, that many like editions of hundreds and thousands of prints.
Absolutely. Yeah, that must be a great experience.
Yeah, and working with the presses and that history, using the wood type to legislate. So 4 phases explores chance operations and interventions upon film through the use of multiple projectors and film loops. When played through optical sound projectors, the screen printed mark in a 16mm film creates its own soundtrack determined by the pattern and opacity of the ink. 4 phases presents the seemingly infinite possibilities that are capable from a finite system, as film loops of varying lengths are continually falling in and out of sync, creating shifting imagery. And then when viewed from the back, the two-way mirror acts as a screen through the layer projection, while simultaneously becoming a projector / reflector, deconstructing the layers on the opposite wall. The apparatus is now implicated in its own projection, creating a volley between material and process. And then this projection allows an opportunity for further possibilities of chance operation through audience interaction.
Wonderful. So can you, we're clicking through the photos, and can you kind of tell us what it is that we're looking when we're clicking through the photos? So at the beginning here, I'm seeing what you're talking about, like with the volley, where there's these projectors, they're projecting, and then you said, is that some sort of like the mirror glass?
Yeah, it's so there's the 4 projectors on one side of the room, and they're projecting onto a two-way mirror. And so with the two-way mirror, I frosted the back of it so that instead of just being able to look through it, it holds the projection, so like a screen.
Absolutely.
But then the front of it, maintains the reflectivity, and so it, bounces the projection back, but it flips it, and so it also like deconstructs it, and so then you get these like really interesting kind of shadows, and in a sense that reflector, that mirror becomes a projector. And so just kind of playing around with like, material and process, but then also playing around with, just verbiage, like words, like definitions, meanings of things like projector, reflector, just kind of wordplay.
Cool.
So with that, kind of maybe taking a step back and looking at kind of the overall theme of the work is, just kind of like systems and kind of these glitches. So thinking about, within the apparatus, there's the turntable, and they're fairly simple machines, it's, relatively simple. But the thing for me is that they're this analog, this tactile object that I'm able to kind of manipulate. So just taking those turntables. So I used to be a DJ, so I had turntables.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask you, I was like, how on earth did you think to do this? But that explains it, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, and so, but it started out, I think it's funny, I started out trying to grow crystals, so I was thinking of ways to, like visual representations of time, so like growing crystals and like using different dyes, and then I started playing around with like pendulums. And so there's a pendulum-based drawing machine that's called a harmonograph.
Okay.
And it's, a lot of times they'll be drawing in sand, and instead of turntables or something, spinning, it'll just be the pendulum, the kind of tick-tock motion.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, well, what about instead of the tick-tock motion, it's in like a grandfather clock, there's, something that's like rotations, revolutions, and I was like, well, I got these turntables, let me kind of see, if it's just going to draw a circle or if something's going to happen. And so the first kind of renditions, I would have to stand behind the turntable like a DJ because the load was too much on the platter, so they couldn't spin on their own, so I'd have to like spin it, move my hand, just like. Yeah, I think for me, so like thinking about like possibilities and, like they kind of come at this kind of finite system. One of my favorite pieces is on the reversioning page. It's that was like my thesis work, and so there's 96 frames per second, and then there's another piece like 1 minute. And so those two pieces are they're essentially the same piece, but just of remixing of like the components. So like 96 frames per second is, the installation similar to 4 phases, where I was using, I think this one used letterpress printed film, and so playing around with like, the printing process with CMYK, and then line weight and half tones, but then thinking about the grid, so like any letterpress printing, everything's on a grid, and then the way the projectors are laid out, like a horizontal axis, and the film going through the projectors, the vertical axis. But then 1 minute is those same film strips, film loops, but just woven together. So it's kind of creating, it's presenting all the possibilities of the overlapping film kind of in one take. Almost kind of like a contact sheet, like whenever like someone sends in a portfolio and you can see all their content.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, also just the idea of being able to hear what you're seeing, like through the optical sound projectors, being able to hear the patterns. And
So in a lot of ways, like the sounds become part of the work too.
Yeah. Like I'm working on a kind of different iteration where instead of letting the visuals, the patterns kind of dictate the composition, like I'm going to go and let the audio dictate the visuals, you know what I mean? So I'm going to try and compose this, using the sound that the patterns create, just kind of working backwards a little bit. I think, as far as like different kind of like apparatuses and things, kind of touched on it, just talking about like the kind of tactility of it, like the physical like accountability that I'm able to kind of easily manipulate, like so like with the film projectors, creating film loops, but then also kind of playing around with the idea of cinema, so like presenting this film that doesn't have an end, or the projectors like added a projection booth and allowing the viewer to kind of see it. Usually when you go see a movie, it's kind of like Wizard of Oz kind of thing, where there's the projector and the booth behind the curtain. And the grid is one I kind of play around with the system, because it's kind of like this. You think about like Andy Warhol and like how he would present like all his like Campbell soup cans paintings, in a grid, just like kind of like an artistic strategy to kind of present work. But then also, you think about like modern art and just, and it's just like an easily kind of manipulated strategy. So like the Herman grid, with the little, where black lines intersect and then you see like these little white kind of blinking, I don't know. And it just kind of starts out, like I never really know. I mean, it's just like with anything, you have like this idea of what the end result's going to be, but, art always is, it's like this exploration. And so, you just kind of take this chance and just kind of explore the materials and kind of play around. And sometimes, you'll get like this really kind of surprising result. I think that's like the biggest thing is like, I try and set up these situations for kind of happenstance to occur. Yeah, I was, for that piece, I was, just kind of exploring, like, what would happen, so it's like a woodcut, like a relief, and I can, it's like a very stable, sturdy, matrix where you're able to pull, like, an addition of prints, an addition of identical prints. So it's, it's striations, playing around with printing, like, textiles, so that as they kind of, as I ran them through the press, they would buckle and kind of warp, shift. So, I wouldn't be able to print like an edition, identical edition. They're all kind of monotypes. And yeah, so with those, you know, a lot of archiving, you know, just like the different patterns, the different weaves we kind of create as they're printed. You know, and so then that kind of led to another piece, these construction drawings. Because I would get like, you know, archive all these kind of matrices, and you know, some of them are really beautiful. So just trying to find a way to kind of present them to the viewer. So I started making like little, you know, 4-inch by 4-inch prints.
Of just different textiles and stuff, or whatever you could find.
And just kind of, you know, seeing what kind of work. Yeah. I think conceptually, this idea, you know, the idea of which is kind of, it's almost kind of like this joke out of like the norm. You know, so like going back to, you know, my experience in commercial printing, you know, I'm printing, you know, editions of like hundreds and thousands. So like, there's always going to be like this kind of mistake that happens where things, you know, where something doesn't load right, like the paper doesn't feed right, or, you know, you're trying to test colors, you know, because we're matching Pantones. You know, so very specific colors, and so yeah, so you know, you get like these kind of make ready where it's just like a bunch of different layers of prints. But yeah, so those kind of mistakes were kind of like these nice little moments of like something, you know, something different. You know, they're one of a kind. And you know, aesthetically for me, those things they're really beautiful because, you know, there's like a certain, you know, kind of minimal quality, you know, just like black ink on white paper, and, you know, there's not really a narrative so much to the imagery. It becomes very much more about like process, and I think there's kind of a reflexive quality with it, you know, where you're able to kind of meditate on the work, you know, like it's able to kind of get a reaction out of the viewer, you know, whether it be like visceral because, you know, it has optical qualities, or, you know, it's just something that you can kind of meditate on.
Okay. Just to follow up on Chrissy's, like, would you say that a lot of like your final finished work is kind of like a documentation of a process, in a sense?
Yeah, like I feel like a lot of the work, or some of the work, you know, almost, yeah, it is like documentation of like process, or maybe an aspect of performance. Like I think of, you know, like 4 phases of sort of performance. You know, that instead of a human performing, it's these apparatuses, the projectors. Same with the drawing apparatus, that the drawings become a document of the performance. You know, the process. I think for me, it was, you know, so working with like kind of optical and, you know, work that explores like perception, it became important for me to kind of work on a bigger scale so that the work entered the viewer's periphery, you know, so in a way like the viewer, it became harder for the viewer to kind of escape it, you know, and to become more immersive. And so through projection, you know, that allowed me to kind of, you know, because it's easy to scale up a projection, you know, it's just a matter of like the throw, so the distance the projector is from the wall. So that became a way for me to still print on a manageable scale, but then also increase the scale, and so to create that kind of more immersive environment for the viewer. Yeah, because one thing with trying to increase the scale of more like 3D prints, you get it's hard to kind of strike a balance between, you know, you can only get so big before you start to the quality of the print, you know what I mean? You kind of balance a really large scale, but then also the technical, you know, cleanliness of the print. Because that's another thing, like in my work, is like kind of the removal of the hand, you know, just like trying to keep them very clean so that someone can look at this print and be like, is this made digitally, or is this hand printed? Yeah, I always joke around that that someone like says that I'm a sculptor in a printmaker's body, because like I do a lot of installation and work. But you know, and it's also interesting, kind of moving into installation. You know, each space has its own kind of like peculiarities, and so you know, very much like a lithostone, each lithostone, even though they're all the same, they're all very different. You know, everyone has their favorite kind of stone. Yeah.
Again, to follow up with Jordan's question, would you say that part of the reason that you expand kind of into like installation and you integrate printmaking is because maybe sometimes printmaking has limitations?
Yeah, I think for me it was you know, like the scale, but then also you know, installation allowed me to kind of engage the viewer in a different way than more, you know, kind of 3D print allowed me to. You know, it's like come back to like 4 phases, you know, or just, you know, some of the other like digital video projections. You know, the viewer is able to kind of become an active participant, so they can start to play around with the light, you know, make shadow puppets.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it changes, or if they're standing in front of the projector, you know, it changes the view, you know, it changes the artwork.
I hadn't thought about that. I mean, they could literally become part of the artwork in that case then, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
For those, so what I did was, you know, so it's like based off of, you know, kind of like mixed tape and trying to connect, you know, yeah, working from a bank of screens and trying to tie, you know, each layer into the next layer, you know, like when you're making like a mixed CD or tape, you try and have a certain kind of flow, rhythm to it. So for these, the positives, they're screen prints. And so the positives for those, I would start out with like, just like a sheet of, you know, maybe just have a bunch of dots, you know, just like polka dots, you know, arranged in a grid. But then I would take them to a photocopier and photocopy them and then kind of manipulate, you know, the image while it's getting photocopied, so it started to create, you know, just started to kind of activate those dots in more interesting ways. You know, and then so then when I would get that photocopy, I would put it on the photocopier and scan that one. And so then, you know, there became so many steps removed from the original kind of dots on the grid. You know, or like I would have lines, just different kind of patterns I started out with. And so a lot of them, you know, they started out digitally, but then, you know, they're made, you know, on a photocopier. And, you know, thinking about like kind of generational, you know, how this starts out just, this way, and it ends up like.
So all these are the same pattern, kind of like evolved into different tributaries in a way?
Yeah, like, I think there may have been like 4 or 5 initial kind of patterns, and then, I remember for a long time just walking around with like a big binder full of, positives, like, and kind of which ones I think would look good together. I think for 4 phases, like the Striations one is just black ink on white paper, and the patterns are really dictated by, it's pretty like happenstance, like chance operation, just as ran it through the press and kind of like buckles and shifts. The 96 frames per second, that one, I tried to really tie in, printmaking and film, kind of have this combination of the 2 processes. So, thinking about CMYK and, all the colors that are achievable, from those 4 colors, but then you start to add in, half tones and line weight. And so now you're talking about like photographic images. And so, just kind of really turning towards that and using that as a way to kind of speak about printmaking and speak about possibilities. And then also, my background in commercial printing. I think some of my other work, I come back to CMYK, because of, for me it represents, these innumerable possibilities, from those four colors. But then some of the other work, really just becomes about, just like personal, kind of like aesthetic, just what colors like I'm attracted to and that I think might look good next to one another. Like black and white and red, it's another high contrast combination, so it kind of pushes that idea, or the optics. And lately, I've been into, let me grab this print real quick.
Yeah.
So I just have this sitting here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's like this kind of pink glow around the prints. I don't know, it might be hard to see.
Yeah, we can see them.
So I've been into like using hot paint on the back of my prints. Just because it kind of creates that glow, so thinking, so kind of bringing in some of the installation considerations into like the framed work. So just, I don't know, just trying to, kind of keep things, just kind of like push some ideas, and kind of, just kind of playing around and experimenting with different materials. But for me, like fluorescence, it's starting to kind of creep into my work because I like that idea of, just that glow that they can kind of create. And they're also, very high contrast. I definitely, I come from like a musical background, so like a lot of people kind of, just kind of like musical kind of methodology kind of come into my work. Thinking about like Stravinsky and this idea of like obstacles, so, and how that can kind of push creativity, like kind of pushing against those barriers. Brian Eno, and his kind of like tape loops. Terry Riley, kind of like repetition. So yeah, there are, I'd like to work, cross-disciplinary, 'cause definitely would like to work with maybe some musicians, kind of see like how the work kind of moves into like, kind of audible, or maybe, with four phases, like, I think it'd be interesting to see if I record, the sound the projectors are making, from the tape loop, and then have like a DJ, or maybe a DJ, but have someone kind of like, mix it and make a composition. Using those sounds as kind of like an instrument. If you think about someone like Quartet or Oval, where they're kind of have these more recording like computers, the sounds computers make as they're kind of like processing. I think that could be interesting. But also like working with like maybe like an engineer or scientists. I think because I feel like I have like a certain limitation. And I feel like through collaboration, we'd be able to kind of facilitate maybe some, these ideas.
Right.
I mean, for the most part, it's been like positive responses. I can't really recall any negative reactions. Aside from maybe, like the work might be too much like visually. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Where it's just kind of, so then that kind of moves into something where maybe at some point I may have to have like a disclaimer of some sort, it's like, hey, there's blinking lights,
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, sometimes whenever I have like 4 phases installed, sometimes I'll feel bad for the gallery systems because it's, it's just this repetitive groaning, so I apologize to them for that.
Yeah.
But overall, it's been pretty good, like, and I think like sometimes there's a definite kind of spectacle kind of element in the work, especially like the projection. So so that's always interesting to see like how people kind of react. Because sometimes people at the projections, they don't want to get in the way of it, so they're very much kind of off to the side. But then other people run in, especially like kids, they run in and they're like throwing their hands,
awesome.
Up through, running through the artwork, which is great. That's the idea. Like I want the viewer to kind of interact with it.
Well, so I guess a lot of your work is prints, and I know it, like especially now, it's not necessary to classify yourself as any type of artist. But would you say you are a printmaker? Because you're sort of like making not necessarily impressions of visual type, but like sound impressions, and that sort of ties into printmaking. I don't know. What would you classify that as?
Yeah, definitely like, even if I'm not making like prints on paper, there's, a very strong kind of connection to printmaking, so like, through like this idea of like repetition, like, sometimes I think about like, there's a performance on my website, in collaboration with my partner, called In Line With, and we were just kind of drawing using like construction, like chalk line on the wall, and so like that motion, like pulling the chalk line up and then snapping it, like that repetition, becomes like a sort of matrix, becomes a constant. where the wall becomes the substrate. But then also like some of the video projections, and I think that's where, like some of the background in printmaking comes from. Like, because in my projection, I'm really more interested in the like form, like the way light gets formed. Similar to how when we're printing on paper, we're really interested in how paper or how ink sits on paper. So like how the light would hit like reflective tape, or how it would like come around like a corner or something. Well, I've always been attracted to like the more commercial processes, so like screen printing, letterpress printing, and I think for me, that's one of the big reasons is because I like that idea of like being able to make a lot of images quickly, and kind of the way, and also like the system of it, like it's very kind of there's a very particular kind of setup, whenever you're kind of prepping for that kind of work, and I feel like it's, like maybe like the ritual of it. But for screen printing, I love the DIY kind of aesthetic, where like, like now I print, screen print in my basement, because I can, like, I have a utility sink, I can wash out my screen, I just burn the screen somewhere else. But also the flexibility in being able to print on anything, essentially, like printing on any kind of flat, surface, print on a wall, print on wood, plexiglass.
So it seems like it's something like it's really, really practical and like versatile.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think of like, like our Pyrex like measuring cups, screen printed, skateboard screen printed. Like. Yeah, for grad school, there's a lot of kind of considerations that maybe I wasn't fully aware of when I was looking for potential schools. I think one of the biggest things for me was 2-year versus 3-year program. At first, I was like, 3 years, that seems a bit long, but having gone through it, I couldn't imagine doing it. Like, I would feel like it would just be like this whirlwind, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's nighttime that's 2 years, 2 classes, and then having that 3rd year to really focus on your thesis work, your show. It was really valuable. And yeah, like, it helps to be able to kind of have some foresight, to know that like, if you're going to apply to grad school, think about like what you're doing now, like, the shows that you're applying to and the work that you're making now, like that stuff's going to be on your CV when you apply to grad school, so just kind of like, maybe just thinking a step ahead and, just trying to kind of prep your resume and things for that, and I mean, internships I felt were very valuable kind of thing, just that kind of professional practice. Like, you can learn a lot of things in that professional setting that maybe you're not going to pick up in the academic setting.
And what about like how to go about choosing a school? Like, how did you go about choosing what schools you wanted to look at, or what schools you applied to? Like, what was important to you?
I feel like I may have done it a little backwards. Because one of the first things for me was I wanted to get back east. So like, right off the bat, I kind of narrowed down, kind of my options. But then another thing is I knew that I wanted to teach, and I knew that OU provided, a lot of opportunities for, gaining teaching experience, through like TAing, but then also as like an instructor of record. And just, just kind of looking, of course, at like the faculty and who I'd be working with.
Definitely.
And yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just to ask people, because, printmaking is such like a community that everybody kind of knows everybody. Like, if you ask around, you're going to get someone who has an opinion or some feedback on. And some other like options. Like the other thing is like I feel like no matter how many schools I researched, I always found like a school that potentially could have applied to. So and that could be a problem also itself. And then spending all your time looking at different schools and never getting any applications out.